Sistas And Law, the first interactive, unorthodox talk show of its kind. Tackling today's hot topics. Join the conversation and participate. Hear unique, passionate views from practicing attorney Rosalyn Charles and Judge T. They debate real items that impact your everyday life, giving insights into politics, civil rights, the economy, world event, and the law. A show that finally brings voice to the voiceless. Sistas And Law.
We are back with Sistas and Law, and our first topic we're going to be talking about is the Electoral College. Now, we know that our President Trump, please, President Trump, if you let him tell it, there was 5,000 people who voted in the popular vote that somehow only voted for Hillary Clinton. Then
5 million.
5 million.
5 million. 5 million, just more, anyway.
But somehow that was able to still allow him to win the Electoral College. If the Electoral College, which is broken down in districting.
Yeah, I think you need to explain what the Electoral College actually is, just so our viewers have a complete understanding, because there is some confusion. Because I still have people come out, well, how could Hillary win the majority of the votes and not be the president?
Well, for instance, you have 3 Electoral College votes out of the state of Connecticut. You have 26 votes out of the state of California. However, you can stick Connecticut in Los Angeles by itself 3 times.
Well, each state has a certain number of electoral college votes, and it's based on the population of those particular states. So bigger states, obviously.
Per capita.
Bigger states actually, the more populated states actually have more electoral college. Do you recall the reason that was put in place? That was a long time ago, and I think the data on it or the reasoning behind it is somewhat outmoded. It was put in place to put a balance during the 13 colonies. It kind of balanced out the power structure. But now
that's because they wanted to make sure that the number, that's when they gave us, I think, were you a third of a person back then?
3/4.
3/4 of a person. We were counted in the Electoral College, but we
3/4.
weren't allowed to vote.
African Americans, slaves, if you will, were not.
Well, I said me and we.
Well, I just want everybody to be clear. Okay.
We do have some other brown and white brothers and sisters that we're talking to, so we don't want to leave you out.
We didn't get 3/4 of the vote. I guess that's the point.
We were counted in the Electoral College. We just didn't vote.
Well, I think that we need to understand some of the history of the Electoral College and why it was exactly put in place. And mainly it was put in place to balance, this is way back when we had the 13 colonies in the United States. We're talking about over 200 years ago.
When there were farmers. More farmers than anything else.
But still the population, at least the white male population within the country at that time, was heavily weighted in the north. And there was an attempt then to balance out the population because they thought if they just had a pure popular vote for president,
that the larger states would win.
Yes.
Well, one of the things that really surprised me is that we as African Americans, if you were owned by a slave owner, we were considered as 3/5 of a person. So for every 5 slaves, that farmer had 1 more vote.
Or at least the population, yes, and at least what had happened then, or what they were trying to do was to give the South more representation. So they got more representation in
But guess who
Congress.
didn't count? Women.
Women didn't.
We were still property.
So if you were a black female, if you were a black slave and you were female, but you got counted.
You got counted. For every 5 of us was 1 person. But you didn't vote. You were only counted for the purposes of the Electoral College. It's difficult to understand because I'm not quite sure if we're counted now if you go by what's going on.
Bottom line is that the Electoral College was put in place so that the more populated states with white males would not outnumber the less populated states that were in the South.
We can agree.
All right, so moving forward then to today, that system is still in place, although I do believe that we
But
have...
our president doesn't believe that.
That system is still in place, but I guess we're no longer 3/5.
We're actually voting.
Yes, we're voting. We have the opportunity to vote. That would be African Americans
But
as
do
well
you
as
believe
analog.
that 49%, I think, women actually voted for Trump?
That's what the facts say, and I'm not going to go with any kind of alternative facts.
Well,
That goes
no,
with the truth.
actually, I think it was 53. It was 53. 53% of the women.
Well,
now, this is
bully for them.
well, you know, this is. I mean, we have to call it like it is. We have a man who has actually said some of the most grotesque things about women that you could possibly say. That had President Obama ever even mentioned such a word, we would have been thrown under a bus.
Well,
This is a man who has talked about people with disabilities. He's talked about every religion. And for all of our religious folk out there, our evangelicals, he's even had an argument with the Pope.
Well, you know, we
he's
can
gone
hang
down.
on and start talking about Obama. I'm not Obama,
But
Trump.
these
and
people
Trump. We
voted
can talk about
in
Trump.
these states
True.
where the
But we
Electoral
want folks to
College
understand-
mattered.
True. So let's explain what that is. And what's
Statistics
this-
has shown over this last election, places where there are the poorest of people, places where the highest in drug addiction
let's look
have
at,
gone
let's look
for
at-
Trump in this
let's
vote, and
look
those
at-
electoral
Hey,
colleges
but let's look at
in the past have been Democrats.
Donald Trump won the Electoral College, but he did not win the popular vote. And I guess that's
That's
what we want
because
to hear.
there were 5,000 people
But
who
we-
voted
5
illegitimately.
million or
5
three-
million, I
three-
keep
three-
saying,
three-
5 million.
3 to 5 million people. But I guess what we want to explain is how you can lose an election if you win the popular vote. And that's where the electoral college comes into play. And that's what I think our viewers need to understand completely.
One, that you need to vote. If, in fact, the Electoral College is depending upon the votes in your state, like in Pennsylvania, for instance. Pennsylvania normally has voted Democratic across the board. That's why when a lot of the pollsters came out, they didn't even think that there was a possibility.
So let's break that down. So that means that not everybody in Pennsylvania has traditionally voted Democratic, but the large majority, at the end of the day, when you looked at the total or the aggregate vote for Pennsylvania, over the course of history, at least for the last few elections, maybe 10 elections.
Since Reagan.
Pennsylvania has gone Democratic, and this particular time it went Republican. So all of those votes, or at least whatever number of electoral votes that Pennsylvania had, went on the Trump side.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because there, in this particular election, more people in those Rust Belt parts of the state actually voted
Yeah, I don't
that
know.
had not voted before.
But I still don't think that explains totally to our viewers how, against, you can lose an election if you win the popular vote. We're talking about the total vote for the entire country.
If that's the
So-
case, everybody in California and Texas, those two states would win the elections every year.
So based on the demographics, in California, overwhelmingly voted Democratic. California is a highly populated state. So
And
there's
most people in California vote.
'Cause you know
Whereas
what they're
a state
saying.
like Pennsylvania, even though it is a relatively large state, most people in the past have not necessarily voted.
So what some of the pundits, if you will, are saying, I guess, are we pundits? I don't know. Anyway, but what they're saying is that from the East Coast, on the coastal states, and on the western states, that's where Hillary got the majority of her votes. And in the center of the country,
Wisconsin
they went-
specifically.
they went for
And they
Donald Trump.
normally did go for Democrats, but she failed to go to those states. So when the number of electoral votes went Republican, Donald Trump got those electoral votes.
So it speaks exactly to what the framers were concerned about. They were concerned about the more populated states overriding or muting the voices of the less populated states. In this particular case, we were smacked in the mouth.
But if the less popular states actually vote, and they vote more Republican than Democrat, those votes will go to the particular side that voted. In this particular case, Wisconsin, that normally is a blue state, more people voted for the Republicans instead of them going to the Democrats.
But again, so it's evened out per capita, so that's how it worked itself out. The more populated states, even though they voted for Hillary Clinton, their votes on some levels really didn't count because the Electoral College
in certain parts of the states,
insulates the amount of votes that can go toward the overall election.
for instance, like we discussed, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Scranton, Pennsylvania has always gone Democratic. This particular year, most of Scranton went Republican.
Of course.
Because of Scranton, even though it's a small area of Pennsylvania,
Right.
it has a number of electoral votes. Those electoral votes, instead
But
of
it's
going
not by district.
right, instead of going Republican, Democrat. This time it went Republican.
But you
So
know what?
those votes
I'm going to
went.
stand corrected on some levels because some states count electoral votes by district. Some, not all, and I can't
Well,
outline which ones.
that's why the Republicans sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. It
You can
depends
watch it
on when it benefits them.
But you know, this isn't the first time that a president has won the election without winning the popular vote. I think we can go back just a short time.
George Bush.
Al Gore and George Bush. He won the popular vote.
Well, it doesn't hurt
Meaning
that your
Gore
brother's
did.
the governor of the state where the counts have to be recounted.
That was where the most significant. It's interesting. It's all very interesting.
Ladies
Do you
and
think
gentlemen,
we should abolish the Electoral College?
It's important. First of all, let's vote.
Yes.
That we've been given that right. We're no longer 1/5. You're actually a person. You're an entire vote. No
and
matter
women,
where
you
you
count,
are,
and you showed yourselves how you counted in the last election.
you came more on the day after the election than you did on the election.
Well, I don't know if that's true.
53% of the women that voted for Donald Trump, I'm sure, are not as happy as they are now.
Well, I
White
don't know.
women, black women did.
I can't
still.
speak on any of that. All I know is that there was a big march the day after the inauguration, and I
But
don't
what
know
happens the day after the presidency? It all happened back on November 9th.
Yes, but
That's when it counts.
I guess what you're trying to say that those women that were out there marching all of
Should have
them
voted.
I don't know that they didn't vote.
Well, they obviously didn't vote for Hillary.
No,
So now you got what you asked for. Now see what you can do about the changes that he's going to make. How is your vote going to make a difference in what happens in this administration as opposed to what you had? You know what you had, but do you know what you're going to
You
get?
think we need to talk about redistricting and how that affects the overall vote? Maybe in the next segment.
Let's do that.
So, in the meantime, we need you to engage in our conversation here. We'd like you to join us on our Facebook page, hit us up on Twitter, look at Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Sistas and Law with Judge Takwasi Sekou, also known as Judge T.
And Rosalyn, we'll see you in the next segment. Take care.
See you when we get back.
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?
In the last segment, we were talking about the Electoral College, and it has to do with the voting process and how we ultimately elect our president. I'm just wondering if what impact, if any, redistricting may have had. And when we speak in terms of redistricting, how the different states carve up and every now and then decide they need to change the lines or the
Well, if you
outer
change
bounds.
the district, you change the number of electoral college, the number of electoral colleges that particular district has.
If that particular state goes by district, some states just go for the aggregate vote. But I'm thinking about I think what happens
Well,
when
the gerrymandering has caused a lot of that those changes to happen.
Well, I don't necessarily think it has any impact on the electoral
It has a
college.
large
I
impact
don't
on
think
it.
so. I think what it does is when you redistrict, it can change the complexion, if you will, of who, and I'm not talking about skin color, whether it becomes a Democratic district or a Republican district. Because when you move the lines, let's say you move the lines inside, more outside
When
of an
you're
urban
gerrymandering,
area.
that has nothing to do. What that does is
Well, is it even gerrymandering or just redrawing the lines? Is that gerrymandering?
the persons who decide where these lines go don't look like you and I. They can split right through an African American community and that community can then be put on, attach it to another white community.
So you're suggesting
and,
it's arbitrary? It doesn't happen as a result of some legislative move?
No, absolutely
so how does it
not.
come about then?
Many times the people that redistrict don't even know they got redistricted. They vote and they think that they are
doing the redistricting. I thought that was a legislative move. That every now and then they have to look upon.
It depends on the state that it's happening in. When they did the gerrymandering going on in Pennsylvania, and those states were broken down, some of the people that were in districts that majority went Democratic, in this election actually went Republican.
And that's what I mean in terms of changing the number of representatives that might represent a particular party. Because if you start moving the lines, if traditionally a certain area always voted Democratic, and then you move the lines and now you bring more population
but if you
in
put
that
more people in white districts, it causes their districts to get higher number of electoral votes.
Again, I'm back to it. Every state does not do it by districts in terms of developing electoral votes.
But the states that do allow it happen to be the states that have the most number of people in the areas.
That's how the redistricting may have an effect on.
And that's what allows more electoral votes going into the Republican pocket.
Okay, so for those few, but there are not a lot of states that do that.
There are more than enough that changed in this particular election for the purposes.
I'm not sure
for the purpose
if
of
the design was in that particular case.
It may not be designed, but what the results is what we have to determine.
I'm not absolutely sure about that.
I've looked at Sora on this one. I looked at the map.
Okay.
The gerrymandering that changed the lines,
and therefore Donald Trump won. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. So that's it.
But even that, he won't believe. Even with that, he still is going to argue because it doesn't change the number of people that voted. It changes the electoral college and the number of people that are in those electoral colleges.
Okay. But
That's what's changed.
But isn't just as much as we like to sit here and talk about Donald Trump, isn't a lot of politics just local? And isn't it more important, just as important?
It's not local when we're talking about the President of the United States.
But now let's not talk about the President of the United States. Let's talk about our congressmen. Let's talk about our senatorial representatives.
That's something totally different. That may not change. They may not change in the individual states. That's why.
I think the lines do have an impact about
local,
who gets voted.
Except when it comes to the President of the United States.
All right, so let's back up.
A black man got voted before a woman. And then when we had the opportunity to vote for a woman, we get the most misogynistic man on earth, and white women, 53% still voted for him. Black women are not that easily bamboozled. 93% of us still voted for a woman. We have always had a sense of kinship when it came to each other and women with women. White women look at things a little bit differently.
So let's relate all of that to redistricting, because I'm still going back to the local situation.
Who votes the most? Women vote more than men.
Let's look at, so you're saying that the lines are drawn based on where women live? No.
Well, most women that are specifically, let's say women that are married, live in districts like that have a higher income. Women that are not married, more likely than not, live in lower income areas.
Can we agree that when the lines are changed, that again, when the lines are the geographic lines for various districts are either expanded, changed, made into shapes of L's as opposed to circles, and because I've seen some strange ways in which districts are drawn. Sometimes you get something that hooks all around a certain way as opposed
Most
to just
people don't understand
doing
all
it.
that.
But the lines are changed for reasons to capture a certain kind of vote.
But when I'm still back at the gerrymandering and how we have allowed the lines to be drawn,
local state elections,
so that the electoral vote is now swinging in a different direction, and that direction is more Republican than it is Democratic.
In the very few states that count electoral votes that way. Yes? I don't know that we're
I
gonna
think
agree
we're
on any of
we're
this.
not gonna
So
agree on this one.
We're gonna
We're
move
going
on
to
to our
ask you,
next.
what do you think? Do you know what the Electoral College is? Do you know how it's broken down in your state? Was your state differentiated by how it voted? Did it matter whether Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton was made president because of your vote? Ask yourself, ask your congressman, look it up, and tell us, did your vote make a difference in the Electoral College? And let us know what your answers are so we can stop arguing about it.
Yeah.
I think
Okay,
that's a good idea.
See you in the next segment. But don't forget to reach out to us on Facebook, tweet us, check out our Instagram page.
And
you know we have
Facebook Live. When we go Facebook Live, I really want you guys to take time, sit down, and let's have a conversation with Judge T
and Rosalyn Charles. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
We'll see you soon.
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?
Welcome back, family, to Sistas and Law. In this section, we're going to be talking about Landlord Tenant.
And that's basically what we're going to hit upon. But you know, the greater issue really is gentrification and how the urban areas are changing from poor to more affluent. And what the building owners are doing in order to get people like you and me, as well as the greater America out, those low-paying tenants. And they're not necessarily just your typical urbanites, meaning black and brown folks. These are long-standing tenants that are getting evicted to allow for higher rents. How do you fight something like that?
Well, if we can go, we're Jersey, but we're North Jersey, so we're suburban to New York.
Yeah.
You go to Harlem. Harlem is almost completely white now, except for the people who actually owned their apartments. I have a girlfriend that lives in Brooklyn. One of the things that her mother did before they made their building into they made it into condominiums. They
Right.
bought their apartment.
Of course, okay.
Now the rents are too high to rent into the building because you can no longer buy them.
Okay.
You can only rent them. Here in New Jersey, when they in the last 10 years, remember we used to have what we call little bricks. All of you who know Jersey back in the day when we had little bricks. Little bricks were 4 large 33-story buildings.
Those have come
They
down.
imploded those buildings, and
Yes.
now what they have put in is townhouses. Now you
Low
cannot
rise.
spread out enough townhouses to fill
Where do the people
33
go?
high buildings,
Where do people
20
go?
people, 20 families on the
Cory Booker
floor.
live in the bricks?
No, he lived over there in right off of.
All right,
the
I'm
park.
sorry. Go move on.
Hey.
Move on. We can move on.
He claimed he lived in the hood. He had an apartment in the hood.
I'm not going to dispute that. Anyway,
No,
go
he
ahead.
did. I mean, he was saving people in fires and
Okay.
dogs up trees and all kinds of stuff.
Anyway, okay.
Well, one of the things I think that we have to understand is that when they imploded the high-rise buildings and built the townhouses, you cannot build enough houses on the same level to fill what was filled up in 33-story buildings.
Okay.
So these people, some of them went back down south.
Yes.
Some of them went into other cities.
Correct.
But they surely could
They
not
left.
come into towns like
left.
what they made sure in towns like Milburn is that the taxes are so high that you can't afford to move in those towns.
The more affluent
Right
areas.
here in the city that we live in,
Landlord
and that
Tenant.
you live.
Okay, so
but
let's
thi-
bring
but
it back.
this is
Let's
what I'm
bring it
saying.
back.
If you can't afford to rent in the town, you can't afford to live in the town.
Thank you.
But where are the people going? Where are these black people going? They're going into some of these smaller
just say, but
towns.
let's bring it back. Now, there have been some situations I understand in some of the cities where landlords probably have been hiring individuals to go into these buildings in situations where the
under
rents
the
are
guise
going.
of fixing.
Well, not under the guise of fixing, but under situations where the neighborhood's changing and they can get more rent. So they go in and they essentially terrorize their existing tenants to encourage them to move. And one of the under the guise, like you said, of fixing, they go in and they rip out bathrooms, or they make the place unlivable. How do you resolve something like that? I would think that you need to go into court with respect to
Let me
something.
tell you, I have sat in so many landlord-tenant cases. It's ridiculous. And one of it's situation not necessarily in ripping out. The toilets are broken.
Well, just failure to fix.
But what the tenants are afraid to report is that if they report the landlord and then they have to leave, they know they don't have anywhere to go. So they actually stay in these unlivable situations
Yes.
until maybe for some reason the code enforcement officers have to come out, but then they have to leave the apartment in order to be fixed.
I think a lot of people really just don't. I hear what you're saying in terms of people, the fear factor. Also, people don't necessarily know their rights because at least in states that are tenant orientated, and many of your northern states are tenant orientated, you file in landlord tenant court, you still have to be in a position to pay the rent.
Well, that's
But
where the
with
landlord.
right.
That's where the tenant makes a mistake, and this
And
is one of the
they
things
don't,
you should know.
They spend the rent as a
You have to put your monthly rent into an account that account has to be made known to the landlord, and then you file for the reasons that you don't want to pay the rent directly to the landlord.
Yes, because you have a right to, at least in some of your tenant-orientated states. Now, not every state is on the tenant side, but in your tenant-oriented states, if there's a serious repair issue, which makes the apartment unlivable, you have a right not to pay the rent, but you don't have a right to not to have the rent when ultimately you need to pay the rent.
See,
You
some
have a right
people
not to
think
pay the
that
rent,
if
but you
they're-
can't spend the rent.
If their stove isn't working and they go and buy a stove, that they can deduct that from their rent.
Depends on what their lease says and what
But
your
if
relationship
that is not
with
what their
landlord.
lease said, you just bought the landlord a new stove.
Yes.
If you put in a chandelier in your living room and there was a hi-hat in your living room and you leave, that chandelier belongs to the landlord.
So I guess when a tenant starts withholding rent, at some point, maybe, the landlord is going to file an action for eviction, and and your defense as a tenant to that eviction is that the repair that he or she has not made the repairs over a substantial period of time,
And that it was
with
in
notice, and then you should go into court armed with pictures, some evidence of your constant contact with the landlord. And you have to have all the back rent. And any judge is not going to give that rent to the landlord. It may be deposited with the court or into a separate account
Until those repairs are made.
But you know, sometime in gentrification, the landlord may not want the rent. He just wants you out. So an action is not going to get filed. What do you do?
More times than not, I have found that because the tenants are ignorant to the fact that they have to have that money, because who is sitting aside $600 or $1,000 a month and not going to tap into it and use it for something else?
Well, they
And
should
the
exercise some discipline.
landlords will wait it out,
Right.
and know that you don't have
Yeah.
the money. Then
It can
file
be a year.
for
It
the
can be a
eviction.
year. It can be a year.
Then file for the eviction,
When you owe
knowing that when you come to
$15,000.
court, that the judge is going to ask, do you have the money for the rent?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have the money for the rent,
You don't have much of an action.
you don't have a
So,
chance.
Why wait out necessarily the court process? Can your municipality help you? Is that where code enforcement comes into
But
play?
even if code enforcement comes into play, code enforcement can fine the landlord, but you still have to pay rent.
I'm not saying you don't,
Again,
but those fines can be
I
onerous.
had a building that was infested with chinches.
And I hope you
Bed
find
bugs.
the landlord
I
$1,000 a
fined
day.
him $5,000.
A day?
I fined him
Per bug?
$5,000 a month from November to March.
Okay.
But from November to March, the 25 people that lived in this building with children in each and every apartment was going to school every day with bed bugs, to the point that one of these school districts, which I will not name, had to close the school for 2 days, which then affected an entire community so that they could and fumigate the school because this one house did not have.
Well, I want to know.
So the amount of money that it cost.
At the end of the day, did those tenants still stay there?
Those tenants stayed there because they had nowhere to go.
And where was the rent money going?
At the 11th hour, they did fumigate the building. The tenants were allowed to stay because they were on. They had subsidiated housing.
Mm-hmm.
They were given. It was paid. I think maybe they paid $89 of whatever.
How does this play into the role of gentrification? That just sounds like a bad landlord.
But be that whether it be a bad landlord or a good landlord, the person may be a good person, but money is still green. They're still trying to get as much as they can to make money off of off the houses. And I'm just going to be real with you. People that don't own things,
right,
don't take care of it.
Those are the few people that play the game. But let's talk about the people, good tenants, who want to stay where they are.
I think good tenants who want to stay where they are do the right thing. They pay their rent.
They do pay their rent, but the landlord wants you out because that $800 a month, he can make $3,000 off a salary.
Under certain circumstances, eventually that landlord will get you out. Over time, they will be. You cannot. You do have.
He'll just not renew your lease for no reason.
You have no. Most rental agreements now are no longer 5-year rental agreements where you have a good tenant and you know they're going to pay the rent every month. These rents are year to year.
Very true.
And so if they think that they can get more money, they have a right to give the 30-day notice and they have to leave. And that's just the bottom line. They own that house.
With no reason
they don't
whatsoever.
have to give you a reason. It is year to year.
So take care of yourself, huh?
You're on your own.
Well,
that's why we need to save and be property owners so that you determine where you live. But first, we got to get jobs. Donald Trump, you job maker, get some people some jobs so they can have their own homes. The one thing that everybody wants to have, at least say that they have in this lifetime, is to own where they live.
Make America great again. Anyway,
thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Join us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
And make sure you get us on Facebook Live, where we can actually have these conversations, where I'm just not arguing with Roz. You and I can argue. I don't mind arguing with anybody, as long as you know what you're talking about.
Subscribe to our YouTube page.
Talk to you soon.
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?